The Easter Sunday suicide bomb attacks in Sri Lanka on 21st April 2019 claimed the lives of 269 persons, including 82 children and 47 foreign nationals belonging to 14 nations, and injured more than 500 others. The first impression of this massacre was that it was purely the work of a few Islamic extremists. However, subsequent investigations indicate that this massacre was part of a grand political plot. Despite our repeated requests and those of civil organizations pursuing the truth, the incumbent government of Sri Lanka has failed to mete out justice to the victims. Instead of uncovering the truth behind the attack and prosecuting those responsible, there are attempts to harass and intimidate those who clamor for justice. As a result, nearly 3 years after the horrendous crime, we are still in the dark as to what really happened on that Easter Sunday. As this is a case of a serious violation of the fundamental rights of the aggrieved victims, we earnestly call upon the UNHRC and all its member countries to support the continuation of evidence gathering initiated by the Council last year and to devise a means to ensure an impartial investigation to unravel the truth behind the Easter Sunday massacre.
The country's head of the Roman Catholic Church urged the 49th session of the UN Human Rights Council to demand justice here in Sri Lanka for the victims of the Easter Sunday attacks, calling the massacre a political plot. And we thought of discussing the issue, the national investigation. The Cardinals call for international support to urge and speed up justice here in Sri Lanka. I've invited to our studios Professor Rohan Gunaratne once again, Director General of the National Institute of National Security Studies, to discuss this. A very warm welcome to you, Professor.
Thank you, Indeewari.
First of all, Archbishop of Colombo also met with the Pope himself and raised this issue, asked for support of His Eminence for calls here to speed up justice for the victims of Easter Sunday. A horrendous attack, a massacre here in Sri Lanka, which actually created a lot of this was saddened people internationally. The crisis was taken up internationally, the message was raised internationally, and we saw countries standing up with Sri Lanka. But why do we need an international investigation into this attack? Has Sri Lanka failed? Why has Sri Lanka failed to provide justice to the victims? And why have we pushed the Cardinal to go seeking international support before the UNHRC?
The Cardinal should have been better engaged by the government. That did not happen. Cardinal should have been briefed once a week of the progress on the investigations. But that Cardinal is angry and annoyed. That is why he has gone to Rome. But what is important for the Sri Lankan people, including the Cardinal, to understand is that the Easter Sunday attack killed 45 foreign nationals. And already there are international investigators that worked on the Easter Sunday case. We had several Interpol teams working side by side with the CID, with the TID, and our security and intelligence services. We also had the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations of the United States, the Australian Federal Police, and a number of other agencies, other investigative authorities working in Sri Lanka on the Easter Sunday attack. So already I want to tell you that the Easter Sunday investigation is not a national investigation. In fact, it is a multinational investigation. Not only that, I want to tell you that the key masterminds and the perpetrators of the Easter Sunday attack, those who are still alive, those who are in custody, they have been also been charged in the United States. So in the event justice is not served in Sri Lanka, the Americans will request for them and they will be prosecuted in the United States.
It was during this session that Deputy High Commissioner of the UN Human Rights Council, Nadia Al-Ashif, called for sanctions on Sri Lanka. I'm not sure the term that she used, but we can cross over to take a look at the speech delivered.
With respect to accountability, because Sri Lankan domestic processes have repeatedly failed to deliver justice, the High Commissioner's reports have already elaborated a menu of options that can be pursued, including at the international level. These are not exclusive, they can be combined. Some accountability measures, judicial and other, are open to the use by member states within their own jurisdiction. We have already seen a number of cases in which Sri Lankan perpetrators from various sides have faced different forms of jurisdiction, including universal. Another option, of course, includes applying targeted individual sanctions to credibly alleged perpetrators of serious crimes. These should be considered for all parties responsible, both state and non-state actors. And there are examples of Sri Lankans being subject to travel bans. And while sanctions, even targeted, are important symbolically, they can also lead to a sense of justice for victims and their families.
Now, she says targeted sanctions should be encouraged to bring a sense of justice. These are all very strong words, and still feels like Sri Lanka has not made a genuine effort to bring justice to these victims when such messages are sent internationally. You did mention, Professor, that the government should have engaged the Cardinal frequently and engaged with him more often. But at the same time, with this issue going out of hand, going international, yes, it could have been an international probe, but now there are calls for justice in Sri Lanka. We've been talking about the final stages of the war. There too, of innocent civilians. People bring up calls for justice, and UNHRC resolutions have continued. But now there's a new story here for us to follow.
Sri Lanka has a criminal justice and a prisons system that is led by Minister Ali Sabri. He is a brilliant minister, and I want to tell you that since he has assumed his role as justice minister, he has reformed the criminal justice system. In fact, in the last 2 years, he has reformed the system in such a way where even the bills that has been passed in the last 2 years is so significant compared to all what has been done since independence. And Mr. Ali Sabri is a Muslim Sri Lankan, and he's a very competent Sri Lankan. So I don't think anyone can say that the Sri Lankan government is not doing its best. Of course, it can do better. Similarly, the Attorney General, Mr. Rajaratnam, he is a Sri Lankan and a Sri Lankan Tamil. He is also worked very hard on these cases. So I think it is not an accurate portrayal to say that we have not dealt with these issues. Certainly we can do better. As I mentioned, government should have engaged the Cardinal better. Cardinal bears the weight of that huge tragedy. I also want to tell you that the Easter Sunday attack, a number of cases, in fact a total of 16 cases have been filed, and almost all those cases will be heard this month. Some of these cases have already started in the month of March and in the month of April. So I would encourage anyone who says there is no justice to go to the courts For instance, in Puttlam on April 4th, we will have the Vanatha Villu case. Vanatha Villu is where Zahran built a safe house and a training camp called the Abu Suray training camp, named after Nilam. And a total of 110 kilograms of explosives were recovered there. If those explosives are not detected, there would have been a devastation, because the quantum of explosives used was 500 grams in 8 backpacks. But imagine if 110 kg of explosives was not detected, what would have happened? And those 4 accused are being tried in the Puttlam trial at bar case. Similarly, in Kegol, the Buddha statues, the Hindu statues, and the Mother Mary statues were attacked. And in Kegol, that trial will be held. Then we also have in Colombo, in March, 25 accused will be tried. That trial has already started for attacking 8 targets. Then we also have another case, which is the assassination attempt of Taslim, the Sri Lankan Muslim who provided information to the CID that led to the detection of Vanatha Villu training camp and the explosives manufacturing base. That also is starting that already started on March 8th. Then in Vaunathiu, where 2 policemen were killed, shot and stabbed, March 28th, that case will start. So I think that to say that there is no injustice is inaccurate. I would only ask those people who are concerned to go to the courts. It's an open trial and they can all participate and watch what is going to happen in the courts.
The Cardinal said nearly 3 years after the horrendous crime, we're still in the dark as to what really happened on that Easter Sunday. But why the delay, Professor?
The 9/11 attack occurred September 11, 2001. It is 20 years. Only now the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is on trial. It took 20 years for the United States. The 9/11 attack was a complex attack. They attacked the North Tower and the South Tower of the World Trade Center. They attacked the Pentagon, and a 4th plane was heading to US Congress. It crashed in Pennsylvania. 4 targets. Similarly, Easter attack was a complex attack. It had been planned over a period of time. The ideology came from overseas. The planning was done locally. So I think within 3 years, there has been very significant progress. I don't think anyone should push government to move faster than this, because then the investigation will not be comprehensive.
But this is the same government that came to power promising justice as soon as possible, and there is a reason why all interested parties call for justice. Professor, if you can shed some light also into the attackers, the bombers. We spoke on this very program right after the attacks on the kind of ideology that came into Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was in the dark, yes, but you've educated us on what's happening globally and how this ideology spread to parts of Sri Lanka and parts of the region. But what really happened? There have been different narratives too surrounding. Some say it's not the IS that was that inspired the attackers, and now we say this is a political plot. What is your understanding based on your research?
This is not a political conspiracy. I have released 11 minutes of a 2.5-hour video where Zahran speaks about his plans and intentions, his ideology. In that 11 minutes, he clearly says that he is going to do this attack to please Allah, meaning God, and for his religion, Islam. So anyone who has such a doubt, I would asked them to come to my office and I will show them the video where Zahran speaks. No one can dispute that. Attorney General's Department, AG's Department, CID, they have all reviewed it. So have other foreign security organizations. But to explain about the attack, in summary, let's look at the two main organizations that merged together to stage this attack. We had NTJ, the National Tawhid Jamaat in Kathankudi, led by Zahran. Then this group merged with another group that was operating in Colombo called JMI, Jamiatul Millati Ibrahim fi Silani organization. This, the JMI, the shadow leader was a man called Jamil, who was radicalized in England, studied in Australia, was radicalized there further at the Al Furqan Mosque. He came back, he tried to go to Syria, he couldn't. From Turkey he came back, he organized JMI, and then these two organizations merged. The Zahran's ideologies, Zahran is a Wahhabi, a Salafi Wahhabi. In Sri Lanka they call Salafi Wahhabis Tawhid groups. And Naufa came from Qatar and he brought the IS ideology and he gave it in a pen drive to Zahran. And Naufa became the deputy head of the Islamic State Sri Lanka branch. He's the theoretician. He's still alive. I have spoken to him, interviewed him, both in his testimonies, both in his interviews with Sri Lankan and foreign law enforcement agencies. He has clearly admitted to what happened. And of course, those who are radicalized by this religious ideology, they staged the attack. In the case of Shangri-La, it was Zahran and a man called Ilham, that is the Ibrahim, the spice trader's son. Then his other son, Insaf, attacked Cinnamon Grand. Contact of Ilham, Mubarak, he attacked Kingsbury. Jamil was going to attack Taj, but his device failed to work. Then he went to Tropical Inn in Dehiwala. He tried to fix it. Again, it exploded, killing 2 people. Then another suicide bomber who made the explosives, Hastun, he exploded in Katuapitia. Another suicide bomber exploded in the Zion Church in Batiklo, Assad. So I want to very clearly explain that this is driven by the IS ideology. After the main attacks that took place in the morning, there was one other explosion in Mahavir Gardens. And Mahavir Gardens, the bomber is Fatima Jifri. She had a Decathlon backpack, similar to all the other backpacks, and another 1.5 liter bottle with gelignite. When the policeman came to interview her, she was already pregnant, carrying a child, Fatima Jifri, with her children. She detonated because she was also indoctrinated to believe that if she died killing unbelievers, she will go to heaven. So they were all indoctrinated by the Islamic State ideology. There's no doubt there's sufficient material that has been gathered in their phones, in their laptops, and on servers. So I don't think anyone should say that this attack is staged by the Sri Lankan intelligence. It's not true. Zahran in fact calls the Sri Lankan intelligence dogs. And Zahran says very clearly that he is doing this for his God and for his religion. And that videotape is credible. No one can dispute the authenticity of it.
What more can we do here in Sri Lanka to ensure that we strengthen the legal framework? I remember talking to you previously, and at several fora we heard that lack of laws in Sri Lanka to prosecute or to bring to justice, especially to monitor online falsehoods and the spread of harmful extremist ideologies in Sri Lanka. We do not have such laws. That's what we spoke then. But what can we do now, 3 years on?
Firstly, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, crafted in 1979 by Mr. Tilak Marapana. It was a very good piece of legislation then. But if you look at the attacks that are taking place now and more recently, that PTA is outdated. PTA has specified persons, killing of politicians, killing of informants and policemen. But PTA was never designed for mass killings, mass murder like Easter, or the LTT attacks done in Colombo or in other places where they kill people in hundreds. So I think PTA should be very significantly revised. PTA doesn't cover cyber. Most of the planning preparation is today in cyberspace. Recruitment, propaganda, fundraising, procurement, all those operations are in cyber. So third is there's no rehabilitation in the PTA. So we have to rehabilitate those who are in custody. If we don't rehabilitate them, three things will happen. They will go and infect others when they are released, and there will be more attacks. Or they will go and stage attacks, those who are released. Third is they will be hailed as heroes and there will be followers. So I believe that PTA should be revised. Second is currently the Ministry of Justice is working with the legal draftsman. Cabinet has approved a bill on online falsehoods and manipulations. Both criminals and terrorists and others use online falsehoods and manipulations. The colloquial term for it is fake news. So we should address it. Finally, we should also have a Harmony Act, ethnic and religious harmony. We should not allow anyone to insult someone's religion or ethnicity. But this is a challenge for our Ministry of Justice, and I hope that Minister Ali Sabri will do it. And I think every Sri Lankan should support it, because it is the suspicion and prejudice that leads to resentment and anger and violence. So we have to go and prevent these incidents from happening. Otherwise, every few years we'll have a riot, every few years we'll have an attack. So we have to prevent that by guiding Sri Lankans, educating Sri Lankans, so that they will not grow up as racists and as religious zealots.
It's time we take a short break here at Hyde Park. We're in conversation with Professor Rohan Gunaratne. You were talking about the kind of legal framework that we need to bring in order to strengthen the setup in Sri Lanka to prevent these ideologies from moving or seeping into society. But what can we do to prevent any such future attack here in Sri Lanka? Because according to information we know, these elements are still operating in Sri Lanka.
Law enforcement, military and intelligence can play a significant role, but a much bigger role can be played by the educational institutions, the information, the digital institutions, and also by the religious institutions. So fighting religious extremism is not only the task of the Ministry of Public Security and Ministry of Defense, but we have to bring the information department, we have to bring in the education department, and we have to bring the Department of Muslim Religious Cultural Affairs into the picture. Education is crucial. Government is making a terrible mistake of continuing with a broken education policy. We don't have a national education policy. So we have a very good minister, Dinesh Gunawardena. I think he should take it upon himself to create a national education policy where in all schools, Sinhalese, Muslims, and also Tamil study, where Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, all of those faiths are practiced in all schools. Because our schools are not producing Sri Lankans, they are producing Sinhalese, Muslims and Tamils, and many with prejudices towards each other. So if we want to build this country as Sri Lanka, our education system should produce Sri Lankans. Right now, only our universities are producing Sri Lankans. And of course, Professor Sampath, the UGC chairman, has done a commendable thing by having harmony centers in the 17 universities. The president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, just inaugurated the harmony center in Vaunia. But I would like this harmony being practiced at schools, meaning make all schools multilingual, multicultural, multi-ethnic. We can do it. If we don't do it now, we will have prejudice, suspicion, leading to resentment, anger. And we will not have a united Sri Lanka. We'll have a fragmented Sri Lanka.
Decades ago, we taught comparative religion. And for years, we've been talking about the need for education reforms. And we're still not there. We're talking about grade 1, the fight to get into a national school, popular schools. And then we're talking about, as you mentioned, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, or Hindu schools. Where do we start here to get to where you suggest, recommend Sri Lanka goes?
Education minister has to take action. He can do it.
How about the National Security Studies to create a committee, or bring together education experts, academics, so that we discuss this and implement it during the time of the present government?
We are doing that. I have met with the education secretary, I have met with the directors of education, I have met with the Director General and the Deputy Director General of Education, and we are discussing, but this is a political matter. This has to be taken at the highest level of government, and the Education Minister has to shoulder this burden and move at lightning speed. If we do not have Sri Lankans being produced in our schools, and if we still allow those madrasas to have teaching only Islam, we will have another attack, because the religious extremism came through religion. No one can dispute it. So even the madrasas, we have to make sure that they learn Sinhala, they learn English, they learn about other religions, so that they will respect the other religions. They learn mathematics, they learn philosophy, they learn critical thinking. So education is a key to fight exclusivism, because it is exclusivism that leads to extremism, and extremism leads to terrorism.
What measures are in place currently? We spoke now about what needs to be done in the future, whether it be legal framework or the education policy. But in order to prevent and ensure that these madrasas are in control, what measures do we have?
Government has taken steps to close down a number of madrasas that preached extremism. For example, the All Ceylon Tawheed Jamaat madrasa in School Lane. Then the Katan Kudi, the NTJ madrasa. But I think that we should have a more comprehensive approach, and we should move forward towards reforming what is being taught. And the Muslim leadership is vital for this. All Muslim political leaders, business leaders, professionals should come together and ensure that there is no harm that comes out of what is being taught. 99% of the Muslims are very peaceful, but it is that 1% that we have to take care of, meaning we have to take firm and decisive steps to ensure that the beautiful face of Islam is being preached, not the Islam that says that Islam should be spread by the sword or by conquest. That was Zahran's message. That is the message of the Islamic State. So Muslims have coexisted beautifully with the Sinhalese and the Tamils for centuries in this country. These are more recent developments, but we need swift action to prevent the dissemination of these virulent ideologies under the pretext of it being Islam.
We've been talking about the necessity to preserve the Sri Lankan identity and the Sri Lankan cultural, the harmonious identity that Sri Lanka has had for years and decades and centuries. But at the same time, about amendments to the Muslim Marriages Act and other legal framework to be brought in to ensure that that 1% you mentioned does not become a threat to the rest of the population. Where are we when we talk about these topics?
There has been significant debate and discussion on this, and also movement. But I think that we have to work with the Muslim community. We have to work with the Muslim elders. We should not isolate anyone. We should have an approach where we embrace everyone and work together. And that is happening now, because the Justice Ministry has a consultative process. And I think that during this government there has been significant progress, but we need to do more. I also want to share with you, I would like everyone to read the Easter Sunday Presidential Commission report. There's a Parliamentary Commission report as well that is not as comprehensive as the presidential one. And they should also read, there is a National Security Sectorial Committee report from Parliament. That is also invaluable. So there are 3 fact-finding reports, and these reports make invaluable recommendations. And for Sri Lanka to prevent and preempt the next attack, the recommendations are in those reports. One is build a very good education system where you produce Sri Lankans. Second is actively move against extremist organizations. Current government banned 11 groups, the National Tawhid Jamaat, the Ceylon Tawhid Jamaat, these organizations, but there are other groups that those activists have infiltrated. They have to be banned. And of course, third is to work with the religious leaders should form a national religious council so that they can meet together and resolve their differences and disputes and think as Sri Lankans, not think as Buddhists, not think as Muslims, and not think as Christians. So I think there should be a movement in that direction so that we will not suffer another attack.
Let's talk about our national security. During the time of the Easter attacks, we talk about how the security apparatus was weakened. And today, have we done enough to prevent a possible threat, an attack, or any other threats faced by the region and Sri Lanka?
2015, when the Yahapalana government came, they crippled our military intelligence organization. Military intelligence is one of the 2 premier intelligence services, the other being the State Intelligence Service. And many officers were imprisoned, many were investigated, and because of that, government didn't assign a priority to national security. Even those operating agencies suffered very significantly. So we have to strengthen those agencies. Intelligence is at the heart of national security. And if you look at the threat environment today, it has become more complex and more diversified. 2009 May, our focus was the LTT. But today we have threats, we have foreign interference and geopolitics, we have organized crime, drugs primarily, we have religious extremism, then we have revival attempts by the LTT. So there are a number of threats, both security threats and non-security threats. So we have to strengthen our national security, but build national security professionals who can think beyond terrorism. They should even think of economic security, food security, energy security. So we have to strengthen all those branches in our security and intelligence community. We have to recruit more intelligent people, We have to train them better so that they will protect this country today and in the future.
You've brought us to the topic of economic security. I'd like to talk about the current economic situation of the country, whether we are moving from crisis to chaos, or whether we can still instill an attitudinal change here to do what is possible to reverse the negative effects of this economic situation on the country and revive the economy.
President has created a National Economic Council, and that is a move in the right direction. But the National Economic Council should not be only ministers. There should be an advisory council attached to the National Economic Council that will constantly advise those government ministers. Otherwise, it's the same ministers thinking the same way. So we need new thinking. So we need to bring brilliant people. For instance, Shantha Devaraja, who was the World Bank's top economist for South Asia. Now he's a professor of practice at Georgetown. I spoke to him yesterday for an hour. And I can tell you that he's advocating that we go to IMF. But before that, we have to increase the tax revenue and work on the VAT. So I think that eventually or sooner or later, we will go in for debt restructuring. So we can't think the same way we did before. If we do that, we will move from crisis to chaos. There has to be fresh thinking. So we have to bring the best brains, the best thinkers, both Sri Lankans and foreigners, and then move this country from a third world country that is further sinking into a first world country. We can do it. We just need some bright Sri Lankans and others who can advise government.
In your view and perspective, how do you think this economic mismanagement of decades, or whether it's this government or all governments together, how do you think this economic crisis situation will have an impact on the country's security and national sovereignty? As we speak about superpowers and regional powers' involvement in Sri Lanka, investment and our economic dependency on these countries.
When the current government came to power, it inherited the Easter Sunday tragedy, the burden of it. We had no tourists coming here. So tourism was just beginning to pick up. Then COVID pandemic. And now, of course, we have Ukraine, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and another huge impact. So I believe that if the current economy continues, there's no improvement, there can be huge social upheavals, and we have to prevent that intelligently, working together with the international institutions, and also we have to work bilaterally, multilaterally with actors. If we do not do that, certainly there will be challenges that will be very difficult to manage. And that is why it is so important for government to think afresh, to get the best brains, and to have an advisory component for the National Economic Council. So like the National Security Council, the National Economic Council should be staffed not only by ministers who are there for some time, who have the same thinking, versus fresh and new thinking that will make sure that we have a breakthrough and we can move forward.
I'd like to once again ask about regional superpowers. Our dependence on some of the biggest and developed countries, and Sri Lanka's economic crisis. investments. I'd like to touch on that because I know you've done extensive study and research into this. How do we manage the national security and sovereignty and ensure that the country does not face future threats, especially when we invite investments and economic involvement, and as we move into more and more debt with these countries?
The foreign policy of Gotabaya Rajapaksa is neutrality, and the neutrality foreign policy was specifically crafted and presented to the president so that Sri Lanka can benefit from China, from Japan, from Australia, from India, from continental Europe, from UK, US and Canada. It can work with any country, multiplicity of actors. So it is the best foreign policy framework we have. So we should continue with the foreign policy of neutrality. But when it comes to practice, our country had shifted closer to China. But now I see the pendulum moving away from a China-centric foreign policy towards working more with India and beginning to work with the United States and Europe. This balance is vital. But there's a problem in Sri Lanka. That is, we do not have an efficient and effective bureau to manage foreign direct investments. Whenever I travel overseas, investors come and they say, we want to invest in your country, but it's a bureaucratic process. The Sri Lankan government agency working on the investment should go to those foreigners and tell them, look, you come, I will clear everything for you within 24 hours. A one window strategy. That foreign company doesn't have to come and stand in line and every day visit the Bureau of Investments. Those people who are in the Bureau should go after. So I believe that we should create separate office for it, to engage anyone who is bringing more than 20 million rupees. And if we can do this, this country will be among the top 10 countries for foreign direct investment.
Before we wrap up again about national security, don't you think Sri Lanka is indebted to one country more than the other? Beyond the debt that has been obtained from these countries, putting Sri Lanka's national security at risk? If so, what do we do now to prevent those future issues?
We are seeing that government is dealing with a number of countries. Initially we were very China-centric, but now we are working with India, we are working with Europe and the United States. So I think that we should continue to work with a number of countries where we wouldn't get trapped by any one country. We should not annoy India, if that is the meaning of your question, because in the past, geopolitically, India was within the Soviet sphere of influence. We were within the Western sphere of influence. And that is the time India armed, trained, financed and directed 6 terrorist groups. But I think that we have gone beyond that. So I think that our foreign policy posture should not harm any country. Our foundation should be friendship to all, enmity to none. Thank you.
On that note, it's time we wrap up tonight's edition of Hyde Park. We had with us the Director General of the Institute of National Security Studies, Professor Rohan Gunaratne, talking to us about the recent calls made by Archbishop of Colombo, Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit, at the UNHRC sessions, and also during his audience with the Pope this week. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.